When you sent me packing down Green River Valley, I knew that if you couldn't, then
Hey,
no one
this
would
is
have.
Adam with Mile High Stash, the podcast that asks what 5 albums you would take to a remote Colorado cabin in the event of a zombie apocalypse, armed only with food, water, and a crank-powered Victrola. How you doing? Get in touch. I love hearing from people who email milehighstash at gmail.com. And one of my favorite things about doing this is interviewing people who do stuff I know nothing about, like comedy, visual art, or today, producing Broadway shows, of all things. Vivek Tiwary is an amazing New York City native who grew up seeing punk rock at CBGB's. This guy saw the Ramones at CBGB's. Vivek, and I'm glad that I asked him how to say his name instead of just butchering it. Anyway, Vivek went from weirdo Indian kid from the Lower East Side, as he says, to the Wharton School of Business, and then producer and writer of Broadway shows, winning Tonys and even a Grammy for work with Alanis Morissette, Green Day, and others. You've heard of the Jagged Little Pill and American Idiot Broadway shows. They were huge, and that was in large part the work of Vivek. There is a show called Heart of Grace coming up at the Roots Music Project in Boulder on Friday, March 24th. And it's written by a guy named Doug Vincent. And Vivek Tiwary is consulting producer on Heart of Grace. And Clay Rose of Gasoline Lollipops will be providing the musical element of this version of Heart of Grace, playing snippets and also instrumental versions of Gasoline Lollipop songs and some new songs the band hasn't recorded yet. Doug Vincent has worked with musicians from the Bodines and Cowboy Junkies on previous versions of Heart of Grace, and this version is Doug's collaboration with Clay Rose, who, of course, gave me the green light to use Gasoline Lollipop songs I played drums on to use as the Mile High Stash theme music. It was great talking with Vivek and getting to know more about him and about Heart of Grace, which is a very deep and personal story about family and loss. Vivek says that Heart of Grace is for anybody who's ever cared about a loved one. So hopefully that means everyone listening, unless you're, I don't know, Voldemort or Donald Trump. Actually, it was nice to talk with a Wharton graduate who's not Donald Trump. I hope you'll enjoy my chat with Vivek and check out Heart of Grace if you're in the Boulder area, Friday, March 24th. By the way, Mile High Stash is grateful for the support of 105.5 The Colorado Sound, the best radio station in the Rocky Mountains. And it really can be heard from the streets of Denver and Boulder and Fort Collins all the way up to Peak Highway and all over the place, and online at coloradosound.org as well. Their DJs play pretty much everything they want, and it's always good. From new music to, actually, the other morning I heard Ned's Atomic Dustbin on the Colorado Sound, and it really took me back to the sixth grade in a good way, surprisingly. Along with appreciating the Colorado Sound, we also appreciate your reviews on Apple Podcasts and even your donations, which can be made at milehighstash.com, or you can Venmo me anytime, AdamIce9 on Venmo. Every little bit of support helps. Here's my chat with producer and writer and punk rocker Vivek Tiwary.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going, man?
Good. How are you doing?
Oh, not bad. Thank you so much for doing this.
No, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
How do you say your name? Vivek?
Thank you for asking. It's Vivek, actually.
Vivek. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
My friends say you can bake a Vivek cake.
Vivek.
So yeah, rhymes with bacon cake. Yeah.
And
Thanks
then
for
your last
asking.
name?
Tiwary. That one's more
Okay.
like how it looks.
That's
Vivek
more.
Tiwary. Yeah.
Yeah. Where were you born?
I was actually born in New York.
Yeah.
So but the family's originally from India.
Yeah.
So yeah, my parents were immigrants, but I was born in the city. Yeah.
So how are you old enough that you would have seen the Ramones at CBGB's? You don't look old enough.
I did see the Ramones at CBGB's, although I will admit it was like one of those like special return to CB's kind of concerts. I was
Still.
born in 1973. So
Yeah.
yeah, I barely squeaked in to see them, but that's why I'm so proud of it.
Yeah.
Thank you for calling that out. Yeah, I grew up going to CB's. My parents they loved the arts, and they were constantly taking me uptown to see Broadway and ballet and opera and all that sort of thing. But as soon as I was allowed out of the house on my own, I was going downtown to hardcore matinees and
Yeah.
the old Ritz and the Danceteria, and yeah. So
What neighborhood did you grow up in?
So I was basically the outskirts of the Lower East Side. I grew up on 12th and 4th.
Yeah.
So it wasn't kind of like the roughest parts of the Lower East Side, but it was
Yeah.
it was Lower East Side, yeah.
It's weird, you can go to the spot where CBGB's was, and there's a clothing store there, but on a
So
map you
weird.
can see, oh, this is heaven right here. This is what was here.
Yeah. I work on 15th and Irving, not terribly far from there, probably like a 20-minute walk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you end up at, going from a kid with green hair who's into, fear and bad brains or whatever, I'm assuming.
Yeah, right on.
How do you end up at the Wharton School?
It's funny. So I definitely I did have half my head was shaved and the other half was yay long and green, and I was listening to all those kind of bands. But I was a good student.
Yeah.
I was kind of a mixed bag in that way. I looked like a degenerate in some people's eyes. But the truth was I was one of the top students in the school.
Yeah.
And I was, to be honest, I was a pretty good kid. I was, got up to some simple trouble like all teenagers do. But looking back on it, like I didn't give my parents too hard a time.
Right.
And I got good grades, and the honest truth is I didn't know what I was doing when I was applying to college. I just kind of did what my family wanted me to do. I applied to Ivies and I applied to Wharton.
Yeah.
And my grandfather, who was a huge influence on my life, was sort of a serial entrepreneur, started a lot of his companies that don't do anything in entertainment, which is why I didn't end up joining any of the family businesses. But it was through his influence that I thought, oh, I should apply to a business school.
Yeah.
And he was so proud that I got in. He was his father, he was an immigrant as well. His father moved from India to Guyana when both were British colonies.
Wow.
He was an indentured servant. My grandfather was literally born on a slave plantation.
Wow.
So he came from nothing, and to see, and he became a very successful businessman. And so for him to see his grandson attending, getting into the Wharton School, it was a big deal for him. And as I said, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just kind of like doing what as much as I was a rebel in some ways, I was also kind of like a good kid doing what his family told him in other ways. And the family suggested I go to Wharton. So that's where I wound up,
I'm constantly telling my kid, on one hand, she's getting into all of the stuff that I was not allowed to be into at that age, because I was raised in a Catholic family, and so I dyed my hair purple and listened to the Beastie Boys, and I remember being 7 years old, and when Guns N' Roses came out in '87, that was like dangerous, so all this stuff. And
big record for me too.
Yeah, I'm almost like pushing on her all the stuff that I was told not to do, and so I am constantly saying, you can dress however you want. You can have your makeup however you want, as long as you're doing good in school. And I think that's a good lesson. And when you were talking, I also wondered if you've seen Flea's induction speech of Metallica into the Rock and Roll
I did
Hall of Fame.
not. I did not.
He was
I should look that one up.
It's fantastic. He was saying that heavy music is the most freeing, liberating, healthy expression of love that there is in the world. And so the fact that you had this outlet maybe meant you weren't doing bad things.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really excellent point. I'm gonna look that up. I'm a big fan of both, so so I should see that one.
Yeah.
Amazing.
What of punk rock did you take to Broadway, and what of studying at the Wharton School of Business did you take to Broadway?
Yeah, listen, I mean, it's funny. As I said, I was just kind of doing what my parents told me, or my family, my parents, my grandparents, to when I went to Wharton, and it wound up being like one of the smartest things I ever did. I'm very grateful for it. I ended up doing a dual degree, so I went both to Wharton and to the University of Pennsylvania School of Arts and Sciences. At UPenn, I majored in English with a creative writing concentration. I was told at the time that I was the first Wharton/creative writing major in Penn history, which is kind of
Donald Trump was doing that.
Donald Trump was. It's it's really funny. I mean, let's not go off on a tangent, but the Wharton School, they conspicuously do not trot out the Trumps in their. They're very good about trotting out their alumni and getting their alumni to support and help and strangely enough, you don't hear them talking too much about about one of their most famous alumni.
Right.
But let's not. That's for another conversation.
Let's just assume that when Trump was there, he didn't have a dual major in creative writing.
No, I don't think that he did. I do not think that he did. And I remember thinking at the time that I was proud of that, but it seemed sort of both odd and unfortunate. I think that people who are in the creative arts, it would really behoove them to understand business in a really formal way. And certainly people who are in business can benefit from having a creative brain. And so to me, it was kind of a natural thing. And I wound up going into the music industry. While I was at Wharton, I got a job working for Sony Music. And after I graduated, I moved back home to New York and I was working at Mercury Records. So that was my background prior to starting my own company. And then, when I started my own company as an entrepreneur in the music industry, I can honestly say I use both my Wharton background and my creative liberal arts background literally every day of my life. And in a really sort of pure way, I could say that like the degrees, the letters of the that are attached to my degree, like those haven't really done anything for me in terms of like I didn't get any doors open because I was a Wharton grad, but like in the purest form of the education I got, which is supposed to be the reason one goes to college, I use that education daily. So I really do when I talk to kids, I really do encourage them, like, get an education. Doesn't mean you shouldn't pursue your crazy dreams if they're crazy, but it's also, apply your knowledge, what you learn in formal education to that, whatever that crazy dream is,
And then how did you go from, working in the recording industry on the business side to writing for a living?
Well, I am more of to be fair, I'm more of a producer than a writer. I do write as well, and I love writing. But I spend, I would say, the lion's share of my time as a producer. I'm very proud of the graphic novel I wrote, The Fifth Beatle,
it's
on
wonderful.
the life of Brian Epstein. Thank you. Yeah, super proud of it, and I do have a couple other writing things in the works. We're
Your
developing
TED Talk about Brian Epstein's fantastic.
Yes. Thank you, brother. I appreciate that.
Yeah, man.
And we are adapting Fifth Beatle into a TV limited series, and I'll be writing the screenplay, the episodes for that. So I do quite a bit of writing, but the honest truth is I'm more of a producer than a writer, and that's where you see a lot of my business and creative. I'm a creative producer. I enjoy putting the creative team together and pairing interesting writers with interesting composers, like producing Jagged Little Pill. One of the things I'm super proud about is putting Diablo Cody together with Alanis Morissette. Just felt like a really good match to me. But, so I guess to me, sort of going back to that dual degree format, it never seemed strange to me to want to write in addition to doing the business things. You ask like, how does that happen? It's like, it just kind of happened organically.
Yeah.
You know, I discovered the Brian Epstein story, the story of the Beatles manager, while I was at Wharton. You know, I was dreaming about working in the entertainment industry. I was a black sheep in that way, you know, being of Indian origin, parents were immigrants. You know, most people in New York, to be blunt, thought that I would wind up, you know, working in a deli or driving a taxi cab, you know, and those people who believed in me thought that I would be a doctor or an engineer.
Yeah.
You know, working in entertainment and producing musicals and writing graphic novels was crazy. Like that wasn't in the cards for me. And when I discovered the Brian Epstein story, and I realized that you know, he was gay and Jewish and from Liverpool, three tremendous obstacles in the early '60s. You know, I thought if the gay Jewish kid from Liverpool could bring the world the Beatles, you know, why couldn't this weirdo Indian kid from the Lower East Side work in the entertainment industry, you know, and produce musicals and write graphic novels, as I said. It was a huge inspiration to me. And so I took that with me. And when I started studying his life, it was for inspiration. Like I wasn't writing a term paper. I wasn't planning to write a graphic novel. I just was looking. I was a student at Wharton who felt like a black sheep. You know, at the time, this was, you know, I entered Wharton in 1991. So it was a period where, you know, before the internet boom. So, you know, in business school, they weren't even encouraging their students to go into new media, much less entertainment. It was really traditional finance, accounting, investment banking, et cetera. So wanting to work in the entertainment industry, I was definitely the oddball. Now that's changed. Like I actually am part of Penn Live Arts and I'm on the Wharton Council and I do various things to help with the entertainment business program there. But at the time, there was no real program to speak of when I was there, right?
Yeah.
So I was really doing all this research, and I've really become one of the world's leading Brian Epstein experts, you know, in part because also at that time, there's no Wikipedia or YouTube or even Google, you know, so a lot of my research was literally firsthand research, like talking to people who knew him.
Yeah.
And anyway, this is a long-winded way of saying that, like, when I got some success in the industry and I started producing shows and I was able to tell my own stories through my shows, I looked around and I realized no one had told the Brian Epstein story.
Yeah.
And that was the moment where I was like, you know what? If no one has done it yet, then why not me? And
Yeah.
so that's what brought me to decide to do it, you know? But it hadn't occurred to me up until that moment. I was sort of hoping somebody else would have done it, but nobody did. And then I felt qualified to do it. So I did.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Brian Epstein story and Jagged Little Pill and, you know, the real impetus for our chat, a Heart of Grace, I think they all have mental health in common.
Indeed.
And I was 14 when Jagged Little Pill came out. And for me, it wasn't that big of a deal. I was listening to Fugazi and Screeching Weasel, but all the girls in high school, I think it was a really big deal that there was a pop star who was screaming in her songs. Like saying it's okay to say that you're not okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, that record is very punk in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of ethos and sonically in some ways too. I don't know if you know, but Flea and Dave Navarro play on that record.
Yeah, that's right.
So you know, it's got some punk roots in it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I actually saw one of my first really big concerts was I saw Radiohead open for Alanis Morissette.
Amazing! Yeah,
because
what a tour!
Yeah, this is like 1997.
Amazing, yeah.
No, it was earlier than that actually.
It would have been, it would have been a little earlier. Yeah,
I think it was because it was before OK Computer.
Yeah, it was the Bends, wasn't it? They were touring the Bends, I think.
Yep,
I think the Bends had just come out, maybe, right? I think.
Yeah, and the very last song of their set was kind of an embryonic version of Paranoid Android. I remember that really well. And the girl that I was dating,
freaking cool.
Yeah, the girl that I was dating was into Alanis, and I was into the Bends and Pablo Honey.
Right on, it's awesome.
The band that Alanis had at the time had Taylor Hawkins,
totally,
who would be in the Foo Fighters in the future, and it was like as rock and roll as anything. It wasn't like a Britney Spears concert, you know.
Totally.
It was
Chris Chaney was in that band too.
Oh yeah.
And he went on to play in Jane's Addiction.
Yeah.
Yeah. She always surrounds herself with amazing musicians.
Yeah.
She's amazing. She's very smart and is a real music head like us, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
So how has it been working on shows that include this mental health aspect?
I mean, it's to me, it's everything. You know, it's what I've decided to do with my life. You know, now that I've been I started my company 24 years ago. My company started in 1999. And you know, when looking at where, you know, when I started, I was really didn't have it all figured out. I was really just doing things that I was passionate about. And you know, it was really over the pandemic. I got COVID at the very beginning, very, very badly. I
Oh,
was
wow.
bed for 3 weeks. I couldn't get out of bed. It took me another 3 weeks to recover. This was in March 2020, you know, so it
Wow.
was literally like right then where there were no COVID tests. There was
Yeah.
like that, you know, I was terrified. I thought I was going to die. I
Wow.
was worried that I was going to give it to my family. You know, it was a terrifying time in my
Yeah.
life.
Wow.
All of which is to say that it got me doing a lot of soul searching, you know, and I really looked at you know, I asked myself three questions. I said, you know, what is it that you do, you know, and I guess a part of this comes from, you know, having been in business for myself at the time, like just over 20 or, you know, over 2 decades. You know, some friends would say, you know, what is it, you know, you do as a producer? And I would sort of laugh and be like, oh, you know, I can't really answer that question. And other people would say, you know, what sorts of projects should we bring you? You know, what do you like? And I would normally say, well, we're across the board. Anything I'm passionate about is, you know, music is a sweet spot. And then I sort of realized, like, you know, being in business for 20 years, like those are bad answers. Like I should be able to answer the question, like,
Yeah.
what do you do and what are you looking for? So I asked myself, like, what is it that you've been doing for the past 20 years? What is it that you do? What do you like doing? And what are you good at doing? What are the projects that you've worked on that have had success? Um, and I was really happy that the answer to those three questions weren't a perfect overlap, but they were pretty darn close. And basically what I, you know, what I do, and then now that I'm, you know, 20 plus years in, I can see it, and it really is, it's my dream. It's what I dedicate my life to, is I work on projects that have a deep musical core and that are narratives with impact, is the way I describe it, that are
Yeah.
deeply story driven, and that story has something to say. And you know, it can be very overt and serious. You know, in Jagged Little Pill, um, you know, we deal with a lot of issues, like including sexual assault and opioid addiction. And for those of you who haven't seen it, it's written by Diablo Cody, who's very funny. So it's not a depressing night at the theater, but it
Right.
does deal with these very serious issues. But as I said, my work doesn't always have to deal with so overtly with serious issues. But I hope at the end of it, of anything that you see that I do, there's some, you walk out feeling a little bit happier with the world or wanting to make the world a slightly better place,
Yeah.
you know? And so whenever I can tackle those kind of issues head on, whenever I can deal directly with a mental health issue or a societal pain issue, it's a particular source of pride. So you'll see all of my work have those kind of elements to it. And you know, now that I'm a dad, I'm looking to do a little bit more child-friendly work. You know, most of my son is now 14, so it's only been in the past few years that my kids can actually come see the work that I've been
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah.
But even the stuff that I'm working on for the future that are you know, on the surface more family friendly, if you will, they still deal with issues that, if you look beneath the surface, they're all telling a story that hopefully will have some impact and will get you thinking and change hearts. You know, that's what I try to do with my work.
Yeah. Well, it's great that you're not just trying to sell tickets, you know. So
Yeah, listen, I mean, you know, I don't want to spin doctor it too much. I am a commercial producer. I have two kids and I live in New York City, and, you know, tuition's expensive
yeah.
here. And like, you know, so you know, I don't want to pretend too much. I do care very deeply about, you know, shows that are going to sell tickets. Like if you look at my work, I've worked with Alanis Morissette and Green Day, and I'm doing the Beatles. You know, these are all artists that have big fan bases. So I don't want to pretend that I don't think about that stuff.
Right.
But I really, really, as a commercial producer, do my best to work on shows that both will sell a lot of tickets and
Yeah.
bring a lot of people to the work, but also have those people walk out having had the story of my work impact them in some way.
Yeah.
So I really do try to do both. You're right. It's not just about selling tickets, but it's also not just about the impact.
Right.
Because I think the two things are connected. You know, I
Hmm.
mean, if you want a lot of people to see your show, you know,
Hmm.
it's like it doesn't do any good if not that many people get to see it. You know,
Yeah.
so it's all connected, I guess.
The artists that you mentioned, the Beatles and Alanis and Green Day, they all have done important work and sold a lot of tickets too. So
Indeed, it's exactly right.
yeah.
Exactly right.
So I'm
And
gonna
listen, you know, like
yeah,
you mentioned Bad Brains, like they're one of my favorite bands of all time. But you know, it's like I did a Green Day musical. I didn't do a Bad Brains musical.
right.
It's not to say a Bad Brains musical wouldn't have been awesome, but it would come with different challenges, you know?
Right. Right.
So you know, this to me is kind of the constant struggle with what I do is to like make sure that I'm working on stuff that I'm passionate about and that is real and authentic, but that also, you know, has the ability to draw a lot of people in. Because as I
Hmm.
said, I want to reach a lot of people and I want to sell tickets. I'm a commercial producer.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of and when the two things connect, there's really nothing more beautiful.
Right. Right.
So yeah.
I'm gonna ask you a little bit about Heart of Grace, but first,
Yeah.
I will ask you the question that every
Ah,
guest gets
yes.
asked is if you were stranded in a cabin in Colorado in the mountains. Have you ever been to the mountains in
I
Colorado?
have. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and there was a zombie apocalypse. Um, and you had food and water and a crank powered Victrola. What 5 albums would you bring?
Yeah. So I would bring Abbey Road by the Beatles,
Hmm.
Nevermind the Bollocks by the Sex Pistols. Nevermind the Bollocks, here's the Sex Pistols,
Yeah.
to quote the full title. I would bring Ritual Dillo Habitual by Jane's Addiction. I would bring The Delicate Sound of Thunder by Pink Floyd,
Oh, wow.
which is
Yeah.
a little bit of a cheat because it's a double album.
Oh, that's okay. I mean,
And is that a cheat? Is that okay? Can that count as one?
you can bring a box set. That's fine. Do
Well, I
that.
was just gonna
Yeah.
say, and if you will allow me, I would like to bring. Now I'm being really nerdy. I would bring the 2019 reissue of Delicate Sound of Thunder, which is technically a part of a box set, but it has some extra tracks and it sounds better than the original version. Um, and then for my fifth record, I would bring Kind of Blue by Miles Davis. And I would readily admit that probably several days into the apocalypse, I would probably realize that I miss female voices.
Right.
But
Right.
nevertheless, those would be the five that I would pick, and then I would regret it a little bit afterwards.
That's a good range of music because you got some jazz that's vibey and improvisational, and then you got some psychedelic music, and then you have probably, in my mind, the greatest guitar sound of all time, which is Steve Jones of the Sex Pistols,
Right on, yeah.
and then you have the Beatles, which is kind of all those things that I just described in one album. So
In one record, that's
yeah,
it. Yeah,
that's fantastic.
yeah. I mean, you just you just did my explanation for me. That's kind of why I picked those five. You know.
Nice.
Yeah.
How did you get involved with Heart of Grace?
You know, it's funny. In preparation for this, I was trying to remember like how I first met Doug.
Mhm.
And I think it's really because the Heart of Grace has always been very much what I do in terms of, you know, the model that I just described. It's a music, it's a story that's told in large part through music,
Mhm.
but it isn't a traditional musical, and it deals with narrative and impact. It's a very deep personal story. It's, you know, really Doug's life story and the
Mhm.
story of the birth of his daughter and coming to terms with his with the loss of his dad. And I mean, it deals with a lot of really heavy personal stuff.
Mhm.
So it's definitely narrative with impact. And you know, he could have easily done it as a play, but he never has. You know, it's gone through several iterations and it always has music. And I first connected with him when he was working with Sam from the Bodines, but I've
Mhm.
then seen him gone to work with the Cowboy Junkies, and then most recently working with the guy from Gasoline Lollipop,
Clay Rose.
Clay
Yep.
Rose, yeah, exactly. Um, who and I guess they're doing a show coming up in a couple of weeks in
Yes,
Boulder
in
at
Boulder. My connection to this is just that I was in a band with Clay I was in Gasoline Lollipops with Clay for a
Oh
long
my
time.
gosh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So Clay and I have been friends for 15 years now, and we play together a couple times a month. We have a duo, and I'm just too busy to be in a band full time because of all the other things I do. But he's been really excited about this,
That's
and
so cool.
I have such minimal, if not zero, knowledge of how plays or musicals or let alone Broadway works. And so, how do you hear, this show is going on at this place in Boulder, and they need help from you?
Yeah, I mean, so we connected, as I said, way back in an earlier iteration when it was called A Day for Grace,
Mm,
and he was working with Sam of the Bodines, and the piece had all the elements of shows, of the types of shows that I love,
yeah.
and it wasn't a show that was ready for Broadway per se, but I felt so connected to it, and also as a dad,
Mm,
it was something that I deeply connected to the story of wanting to do better for the next generation.
mm,
That was something I mentioned earlier in this chat, that
yeah.
I care very deeply about wanting to create work for my kids now that I'm
Yeah.
at that place in my life. And anyway, I found the piece so moving, and then I met Doug. And if you've spent time with Doug, he's just the nicest, most inspiring guy. And I just said, like, even though you're not around the corner and this piece isn't ready to come to Broadway, like,
Mm,
what can I do to help? Because it's sort of is very adjacent to my world.
yeah.
And I just said, sign me up to help in any way I can.
Yeah.
Um, and I'll let him tell you whether I've done a good job or not. But I've tried to guide him through the idea of putting music into shows, but not necessarily in traditional ways. Most of the
Mm,
shows that I've worked on are at least at the time they are released were considered very edgy and different, and so I think what he's doing and using music in a deep way that's narrative, but that
mm,
isn't characters breaking out into song in a
right. Right.
traditional musical way. Um, Felt very much up my alley, and I hope that I've been useful in guiding him as to how you do that, both creatively as well as how you build a business model around it. And I know he has big plans for it, and I think
Yeah.
it can get to Broadway.
Yeah.
When I first yeah. Anyway, so I'll stop there. But that's what I've been doing with Doug, and I'm in for the long haul with him. Anything I can do to help both Doug, because he's such a great guy, and this piece because it's a piece that's important, and I think um anybody who's ever like cared about a loved one, which is
Mm,
just about every human being, will find something in Heart of Grace,
yeah.
will associate to one of the characters, and that to me is real magic in theater.
Yeah.
So
Well, my intro and outro music for the podcast are Gasoline Lollipop songs that I played on. So it would be interesting if
that's awesome.
one of those was also in the show, but
In
we'll
the
see.
piece, yeah.
Yeah. We'll talk with Clay. My last question for you is just, when does your life get turned into a musical? That's what I want to know.
Oh gosh, I think that's kind of you to say that, but I think not in my lifetime. How about that?
Not on your lifetime.
That'll be the
Uh,
answer to the question. There are too many stories that I want to tell,
yeah.
and if I end up closing my eyes and having lived a life that was inspiring, then maybe one day somebody will do something with it, but
Yeah.
not in my lifetime. Let's tell other people's stories.
Yeah.
But it's kind of you to suggest otherwise.
Thank you so much for
Thank you,
doing this.
brother.
I'm excited to see the Brian Epstein graphic novel come to life on the screen.
Thank you for saying that. I will be a good producer and promoter, and say, we have a lot of exciting things coming around the corner, and probably some big news on the Fifth Beatle. So if anyone's listening and wants to keep tabs on me, you can find me at find our projects at tiwaryent.com. And I'm also on Twitter at Vivek J. Tiwary. I'm also on Facebook. And so, that it's a very exciting time for me because I raised a little bit of money last year. I hired new staff. So I've
Mm.
expanded my bandwidth really. And we have a ton of new projects we're going to be announcing. And with any luck, as I said, I'll have some Fifth Beatle. I'll have some big Fifth Beatle news coming soon.
Sweet.
So yeah, can't quite talk about it just yet,
Right.
but coming soon.
Thank you so much for doing this. And I'm going to go listen to some Bad Brains right now for sure.
Right
That's
on.
happening. Cool.
They were yeah, I mean, what an amazing band they were. You know, I don't know if you know this, but like part of what they said that they were frustrated jazz musicians, and they realized they could never be as amazing as they wanted to be on jazz, so they just decided to play their jazz as fast as they could.
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
how they developed their sound. And it's like you can hear it, you know. So
Yeah.
again, to me, it's like, you know, it's not such a stretch, right? That I have both you know, the Sex Pistols and Miles Davis in my
Right.
five, right?
Yeah.
The bad brains are sort of right there in between,
Yeah, like,
aren't they?
exactly. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, man.
Yeah. Right on.
Well, thank you so much and have a great night.
Thank you. You as well.
Yeah.
Go and enjoy your bad brains.
Absolutely.
Lots of love, brother.
See ya.
Thanks.
I'll give you another hour, then I gotta run.
That was Vivek Tiwary, acclaimed producer, writer, father, and Bad Brains fan. Yeah, I can honestly say that not much I've experienced in life, not swimming with manatees or biking up mountains in Switzerland and Italy, visiting St. Peter's in Rome, or even pitching a shutout in my softball league recently, has felt as spiritual as listening to Sailin' On by Bad Brains. But Heart of Grace by Doug Vincent, with music by Clay Rose of Gasoline Lollipops, and guidance from Vivek Tiwary, is supposed to be pretty moving, maybe even spiritual. So maybe we should all check that out at the Roots Music Project in Boulder, and listen to Bad Brains on the way to the show. I don't know. Thanks for listening to Mile High Stash. And also, if you're around Denver, Saturday, April 1st, I am doing the first ever live recording of an episode of Mile High Stash. This is going to happen at number 38 in Denver with my guest, Fox Feather, who will be performing and being interviewed by probably a very nervous me. I'll have a drink before him. It'll be all right. Anyway, thank you for listening to My Last Stash, and we'll see you next Monday, as usual.
Without you, well, I wish I were true, and I wish I were you, sitting across from me, instead of this impersonation of who